Kaybetmek her zaman kayıp mıdır? Yoksa öğrenmek adına bir kazanç mıdır? Bu konuda siz ne düşünüyorsunuz? Kariyerinde tam olarak bu konulara odaklanmış önemli bir konuşmacımıza yer vereceğiz şimdi de. Bazen kazanırsın, bazen öğrenirsin temalı konuşmasını dinlemek üzere sizlere Museum of Failure küratörü ve inovasyon araştırmacısı Sayın Dr. Samuel West'le baş başa bırakıyoruz.
Hi, my name is Samuel West. I'm the founder and curator of the Museum of Failure. It's a shame that because of coronavirus that we couldn't do this event live in Istanbul, but I hope that this short video will convey some of the more important points from my keynote on learning from failure. Okay, let's get started. The Museum of Failure is a collection of failed innovations from around the world. It started in Sweden in 2017 and has since then traveled the world. It has been to Los Angeles and to Shanghai most recently. In addition to the full museum, there's a small miniature pop-up museum that's hired by innovation and business events that has been around the world as well. And the whole point of the museum is to really communicate how important failure is and the acceptance of failure, how important that is for innovation and progress. We have to be much better at accepting failure and more willing to learn from failure. Let's get right into it. This is Jeff Bezos, 2014. Amazon launched the Amazon Fire Phone. Now, the Fire Phone was supposed to be a serious competitor to Apple and to Google, and the expectations were very high. The Fire Phone was a complete fiasco, and Amazon lost millions and millions of dollars. Now, you might think like, oh, then that's devastating. Quite on the contrary, Jeff Bezos totally understands that if you want to innovate, you have to be willing to fail. And this is the whole message of the museum. Amazon is undoubtedly one of the world's most successful companies, and they continue to take these risks. And as the company grows, so does the risk level that they take. The tricky thing about innovation is that most innovation projects, they fail. So it's really risky. At the same time, companies that don't take those risks, that don't innovate, those companies die out. So it's a sort of a difficult situation. You have to really truly be willing to risk failure if you want any kind of innovation. So before we go any further, we have to understand some basics about failure. So there's good failure and there's bad failure. The good failure is the type of failure that is done in the name of progress, in the name of innovation. So when somebody or a team or an organization does things that to push the boundary, to try new things, at the frontier of what's possible, this kind of failure is the type of failure that the Museum of Failure advocates, and that most people would consider the good kind of failure. The bad kind of failure, the type of failure that should still be, discouraged, is failure done because of sloppiness or incompetence. This type of failure that's predictable and preventable. So it's important, especially if you're a manager or a company leader, that you understand the difference between good and bad failure, because that'll help you reward the correct type of failure in your organization. It's also important to understand the difference between small and big failures. So size really does matter here. We should not be afraid of the small failures, the failures that don't damage the organization. And if an organization is good at handling these small failures, good at identifying them, learning from these failures and communicating these learnings to the rest of the organization, then a lot of these massive big failures, these fiascos, they can be avoided. So let's look at some of the objects in the Museum of Failure and see what we can learn from these stories. Here's Apple. 1993, they launched a very revolutionary small personal digital assistant called the Apple Newton. The revolutionary thing about the Newton was that there was no keyboard, so you just used your own handwriting to write on the screen. Now this was super exciting in 1993. The problem is that Apple launched this product before the technology actually worked. So they sold the devices, people started using them, it didn't work, and Apple was mocked and made fun of by everybody. In fact, the word Apple Newton became synonymous with expensive failure. So they launched it too quickly. They should have waited till it worked. So you would think Apple, they should have learned from their mistakes. Well, I don't know. In 2012, so what's that, 20 years later, Apple launches Apple Maps. They wanted to get Google Maps off of the iPhone, so they launched their own map system. It was a total disaster, as you can see on these images. People were, cities were located out in the ocean. Nothing worked. What happened ultimately was that the CEO, Tim Cook, had to apologize publicly and say, okay, I think you should use Google Maps instead. You would think that Apple had learned from their mistakes with the Apple Newton. But it's difficult to learn from failure. Google isn't very much better here. They're an awesome company, very innovative, but even the big boys make mistakes. So this is Google Glass. Maybe you remember this from 2013. It was revolutionary. These glasses had a special prism screen, so you could see things magically in front of you. And they were, of course, connected to the internet, had a camera, a video camera, microphone, voice controls. Awesome thing. The Google Glass was a complete failure for two reasons. One was there was no applications for it. There was nothing really useful you could do with the Google Glass. This is a big problem. Secondly, the Google Glass failed because of privacy concerns. I mean, it's a spy device. You can record people without them knowing about it. These kind of issues, Google should probably have been aware of these before they launched Google Glass. The lessons learned from Google Glass: take privacy concerns seriously. Number two, more importantly maybe, is make sure that your innovation adds value or is useful to the users. This one you're maybe familiar with. This is one of the classics. This is Coca-Cola from 1985. So Pepsi was, the underdog, was getting more and more popular and was very aggressive in their marketing. And Pepsi had consumers take taste tests, so you could taste Coke and Pepsi. And what Pepsi said is that most people prefer Pepsi. And Coca-Cola was like, oh man, So they did their own research, and Coca-Cola found out that people actually like Pepsi better. They like the taste better. So what Coca-Cola did in 1985 was they changed their original classic recipe of Coca-Cola to make it taste more like Pepsi. It's as crazy as it sounds, yes. It was a complete disaster in many different ways. Ultimately what happened was, in the aftermath, was that Coca-Cola understood that their brand belonged to the consumers, not to the company, and that they had to take care of that. In the end, this whole fiasco with the new Coke, or Coke 2, actually turned out to Coca-Cola's advantage. But the story reminds us that you have to be careful about and truly understand your brand before making any changes. Another branding failure here is from Colgate. Colgate launched in the 80s, according to the branding literature. Colgate launched a series of frozen dinners. Now, I know you're probably asking yourself, what does toothpaste have to do with frozen food? Nobody really knows, but Colgate thought that was a good idea. Here also, the brand is important. Where do you want to buy your frozen food from? A toothpaste manufacturer or, yeah. Another example here, this is a funny one. When I get asked, what is your favorite innovation failure? And I have to think of a simple one that's easy to explain, and yeah, it always makes me laugh. It's this one. This is Olestra from Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest consumer product companies in the world. They, in 1990s, their early 90s, they launched a calorie-free fat substitute. Let me say that again. Calorie-free fat substitute. This means that you can eat as many potato chips as you want to without getting fat or fatter. This was amazing. So now all of a sudden you can eat all the fat foods you want without any guilt. In fact, on this Pringles package, it says 100% satisfaction, 0% guilt. Now, this is fantastic. It's a true innovation. But there was only one slight problem. Yeah, exactly. The Olestra additive caused explosive diarrhea. So people were eating way more potato chips than they should have, and this caused problems with their stomach. Lesson learned, you can't trust people, you have to test, and you can't assume anything about a consumer behavior. You have to experiment and test. So to wind it up, or to round it off, it's important to understand that we need failure for innovation, and to create a culture that is truly innovative. We need to destigmatize. We have to make it more safe to fail within the organization. And this is a problem because company leaders, organizational leaders are like, yeah, failure, innovation, yeah. The problem is, in reality, they still punish people who fail within the organization. And this is a huge problem. So in order to change this culture, we really need to establish a culture of safety within the organization. Now, there aren't really any super sort of easy steps for organizational leaders to follow to establish an environment in which it's safe to fail. The closest we can get, and this is actually one of the hottest topics in organizational psychology right now, is psychological safety. Psychological safety is a term that describes within a team how safe it is to be vulnerable, to take risks, to admit that you fail, and to openly share information. Google, for example, has shown in a huge study from 2015-16 how important psychological safety is. It was the most important factor for establishing high-performing, innovative teams. So if you're interested in this, I would recommend that you Google the terms psychological safety and find out how you can build that in your teams. I'll end here. Museum of Failure is still touring the world, although it's a bit of a failure right now because Corona makes it impossible to travel around, and I'm hoping that soon that we'll get back on the street, helping people understand how important failure is for all kinds of progress. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Museum of Failure'ı en kısa zamanda gezmek gerekiyor anladığım kadarıyla. Umuyorum Trust İstanbul düzenleyicileri de seneye bu muhteşem sergiyi bizlerle buluştururlar.